I'm Hadassah, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Real Woman, Real Torah, a project of Batsheva Learning Center. We're here to offer you an authentic Torah learning experience, produced for women, by women. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our pre-Pesach episode. In this episode, we're going to be exploring our learning booklet that we just put out that is all about the mitzvah of eating matzah, and on a deeper level, really exploring what the concept of emunah is and how the story of Pesach is really our birth story as a nation and the time in our history when our emunah is born for the first time. And we can then, every year when we celebrate Pesach, tap into that original experience of emunah that we experienced then. So before we get into the sources that we explore in this booklet, I want to just pose a question to think about, which is, how do we define emunah? We often translate the word emunah as belief or blind acceptance. And the way that can sometimes be interpreted is that emunah is this sort of acceptance of something that we don't fully understand, and we're kind of putting aside our logic and putting aside our mind, and just kind of surrendering to something outside of us that kind of transcends what we're able to really work out and understand and make sense of. And something that we're going to come to throughout the sources that we learned today is that emunah is really something very, very profound. And through understanding the symbolism of matzah and really what matzah is all about, we'll get a much, much deeper understanding of what emunah is and what the experience of emunah feels like, and how we can tap into that emunah experience every year on Pesach at the seder. We're going to open with the question of why we eat matzah on Pesach. On a very simple level, the matzah is flat, it doesn't have time to rise, and this is sort of a commemoration of when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim in a haste, and their dough was still on their backs, and they didn't yet have time for the dough to rise before they went out into the desert. And the matzah that we eat is this, visceral experience of what the Jews experienced then when they left Mitzrayim so quickly, before their bread had enough time to rise. But we're going to explore this a little bit deeper, and we're going to first explore it through the perspective of the Sefer HaChinuch, and then kind of get a different perspective based on various sources in the Zohar, Likutei Torah, and Derech Mitzvah. So the first idea we're going to introduce is from the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch is an anonymous work from 13th century Spain, and in it, the author is writing an educational guide to his son. He addresses it to his son throughout the work, and he's teaching him about each of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. And for each of them, he gives the basic halachic guidelines for that mitzvah, as well as some of the ethical or philosophical reasons behind the mitzvah. So when it comes to the various mitzvahs that are associated with the seder, which there are many of them, throughout those, embedded in those explanations of those mitzvahs, the Sefer HaChinuch gives us a little bit of a picture or an understanding of the broader goal of the Pesach Seder, why it's so foundational and so important, and why we have so much ritual associated with that experience. So when he talks about the mitzvah to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, he establishes this idea that, we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim a lot, both in our davening and also in the Torah itself. It's constantly referring back to the experience of leaving Mitzrayim, which seems to be a little bit of like an interesting thing. Like, why is that such a huge central theme throughout Yiddishkeit, throughout Judaism? And he explains, and this is explained by other people as well, the Maharal talks a lot about this, that Yetzias Mitzrayim is this experience that we had as a people, a national experience, that really demonstrated to us and instilled in our heart this belief in Hashem. Because when you see that the creator of the world is able to intervene with the rules of nature and cause all these miracles to happen, the 10 plagues, the Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and all of these wondrous, really shocking miracles that happened when Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, that is kind of this very obvious, clear demonstration that there must be a creator of the world, right? The world does not run on its own. The rules of nature are not just these self-functioning powers, but really there must be a creator that created all of them and continuously controls them. And the proof of that is the fact that he's able to intervene with nature when necessary in order to demonstrate, and accomplish what he wants to do. And that's why the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim is so foundational to our faith as Jewish people, because just on a historical level, this historical event was such a obvious display of Hashem's power and might and the fact that he is really the one in control of the universe. So that's sort of just like a very general understanding of why Yetzias Mitzrayim as a whole is so foundational to our faith and why we speak about it every single day in davening consistently and constantly are remembering it. But then the Sefer HaChinuch continues, specifically when he talks about the mitzvah of not breaking a bone of the Karban Pesach. And he goes on to a little kind of tangent there and talks about how all of these rituals of the seder, and here again, he's addressing this to his son, and he's saying to his son, you might think that this is, why do we need to have so much ritual? Why do we have to have such a scripted, schedule on the night of the seder, maror and matzah and 4 cups of wine and all these different things, all these rituals that we do at the seder? Why can't we just talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim? Just tell the story, remember it, right? We could just have one mitzvah to remember this event. Why do we have to have so many practical, physical experiences to commemorate that one event? And he says, he kind of admonishes his son, almost saying this is just, this question you're asking is because of your youthfulness. And really, you should really understand and appreciate that, of course, we have to be engaged in all of this, this immersive experience of the Seder and do all of these physical mitzvahs because, and he introduces this idea, which has, become very famous, which is, which means that our hearts are drawn after our actions. In other words, we can mentally recall and remember and think about all of these miracles that Hashem has done, but that's never going to replace the experience of actually using our body to eat the matzah and eat the maror and recline in our chairs and do all of these rituals that literally uses our physical senses to experience what the Jewish people experienced, right? So being that Yetzias Mitzrayim is such a foundational event in our history, and we really want to commemorate that and instill that in our hearts, the only way to do that most effectively is to not just remember it in our minds and hearts, but to actually reenact the experience that those Jews experienced. And that's why we have all these mitzvahs, including the mitzvah of matzah, right? So matzah, literally when our ancestors came out of Mitzrayim, they had to eat this bread. So we are going to eat the same bread that they ate, because when we eat that bread, it triggers in our minds and hearts this memory of these unbelievable miracles that Hashem performed for us as a people. And that automatically instills in our hearts this sense of awe and belief and faith that Hashem is the one who created the world and is constantly in control of the world. So this is sort of a very kind of rational and sensical explanation for why we eat matzah and why this experience of doing these rituals on Pesach really help instill that type of faith in us through those immersive experiences. What we're going to do now is actually take that idea and kind of move it to a deeper level and say, based on what the Sefer HaChinuch is saying, the mitzvah of eating matzah is really a commemoration or a reenactment of something that happened a long time ago. But what we're going to see now is that the Zohar and a lot of the sources in Chassidus that explain this idea from the Zohar actually say something a little bit different, which is that matzah is not just a commemoration of something that happened. It's not just there as an immersive experience to remind us of this miraculous experience that our ancestors had, but the matzah itself actually has a spiritual power in it. And when we eat matzah, it literally feeds us our faith. And what this is kind of, I think, sort of this distinction of the matzah not just being symbolic, but the matzah being a literal, when we eat matzah, we're literally ingesting faith, is sort of representative of, in general, this shift that Kabbalah and Chassidus will often try to make when it comes to how we approach mitzvahs in general, right? Where when we look at, the meaning or the reason behind why we do mitzvahs, a lot of the mitzvahs seem to have these sort of symbolic meanings to them, right? So like we do certain mitzvahs to remind us of something else, right? Or to commemorate something. But something that Kabbalah and Chassidus really try to drill home is that these mitzvahs are not just symbolic of something. It's not just like a way of us kind of getting ourselves in the mode or in the mindset of a certain, spiritual, appreciation or understanding, but they actually have a real spiritual impact, right? We're actually accomplishing something real in the moment, not just a commemoration, not just a symbol. Like the matzah actually contains in it this emunah that literally we experience through eating that matzah. And these spiritual realities we can't necessarily see or sense in a physical way, but it doesn't make them less real. And this is like a really radically different way of understanding mitzvahs as, again, not just being a symbolic, but as being an actual physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. So let's go into what that means for matzah specifically. So we have this idea from the Gemara in Brachos, which says that a child does not know cannot call their father and mother, right? So they can't say their parents' name and call out to them until they've tasted the taste of grain. And the implication, which we're going to learn, is that this doesn't just mean that like it happens to be around the same age, right? So around the time when a toddler starts to, or infant toddler starts to eat solids, starts to eat bread. That's around the same time when they, are first able to enunciate words and say their parents' names. But it seems to be saying that there's something about eating grain that actually develops the brain to be able to have that recognition, right? So it's like the grain that the child eats that nourishes their brain, nourishes their mind to be able to have the maturity to be aware that this is my father, this is my mother, and I have some sort of bond with them, right? And the Zohar actually makes this association with the Jewish people, right? That we have a similar idea, just like there's this idea that like any child, when they eat grain, that gives them the maturity, that ability to have this awareness of their parents. That same thing is true about the Jewish people as a whole. When we came out of Mitzrayim, we were like this young infant. And through eating grain, through eating the bread, which is matzah specifically, that gave us this level of maturity, this ability to recognize our Father in heaven. But what's really interesting about this is that this recognition that the child has of their parents is very unsophisticated, right? So the parent isn't really able to define, like they can't explain biologically, what does it mean, this is my father and this is my mother. They don't necessarily have any kind of sophisticated relationship with their parents. All they know is that in some way I belong to these people, right? Like I belong to them, they belong to me, like we are intrinsically connected to each other, and like I can recognize who they are and that we have this intrinsic bond. Right? And again, they can't explain this with words or define it or have any kind of sophisticated understanding of what this means. It's just this intuitive awareness that this is the case, that we have this relationship, we have this bond, like this mother is mine, this father is mine. And this is very much kind of gives us a clue as to what the nature of emunah is, right? So all of us, like our emunah on a very basic level, on its most foundational level, is really like this awareness of a child, right? Where we have this awareness of Hashem that's not sophisticated, that's not complicated. We can't necessarily explain philosophically like who Hashem is or what our relationship to him is, or how we can't answer philosophical questions about how those, how Hashem's existence connects to the world's existence and all those things. But it's something that's very intuitive and very real in our own consciousness. And this is very much kind of connected to this passage from Derech Mitzvah Secha, which was written by the Tzemach Tzedek, where he actually explores the mitzvah of matzah. And in that context, he explains what is emunah. And he says, emunah is not belief that there's a creator of the world, right? Because the belief that there's a creator of the world is something that we can actually understand with our minds, right? He says any thinking person can look at a physical body of a human being, and they know there's a soul there, right? They know there's a consciousness. They know there's a living conscious being embedded in that physical body. They don't just see an eye and a nose and a mouth and hands and feet. They see a person. They could see the nefesh, the soul behind that body. And the same thing is true about God and the world, that any thinking being, if they're looking at the world with like clarity, then they can see that there's a soul behind this world, right? There's this vivifying force of the creator that's enlivening creation at every moment. And that's something that's kind of, obvious intellectually, right? He says faith, emunah, is really the ability to have this relationship with Hashem that transcends the way Hashem relates to us through the world, transcends the way Hashem as a creator, right? It's this very natural, intuitive relationship with Hashem that goes beyond all of that, right? Because again, you don't need emunah to believe in Hashem as a creator. You need emunah to have this sense, this awareness, this intuitive, relationship with Hashem as He is beyond a creator of the world. And that is a faith that is unique to the Jewish people. And that is a faith that was instilled in us through the experience of leaving Mitzrayim, right? And he says that, he gives an example that you can say a word, and the words that you say, right, just a couple words, are so minute and insignificant compared to the original thought where those words originated. And that thought is really insignificant compared to the mind, right? Like your mental, your inner, the inner workings of your mind is so complex and so rich and so deep. And like one thought that you've had is so small and insignificant compared to the entirety of your intellect. So he says, like, the whole world that we see, right, all of that is just like one word for Hashem. So looking at Hashem as a creator of that world is, this very, very, very kind of superficial awareness of Hashem. And emunah allows us to transcend that and experience Hashem as He is, beyond just being a creator of the world. Now, where did we get this emunah from, right? Where did we get that ability to have that intuitive connection to Hashem that transcends His role, so to speak, as creator of the world? We get that from our experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And in a sense, Yetzias Mitzrayim is like our birth story as a Jewish nation. In Yecheskel, it describes this beautiful metaphor of the Jewish people being born and being in this very, very vulnerable state, and Hashem kind of swooping us up and caring for us and nurturing us and kind of raising us, so to speak, through the process of bringing us out of Mitzrayim. I'm just going to read the passage from Yecheskel because it's so beautiful. This is from Yecheskel Tez Zayin, Psukim Daled through Yudaled. And Yecheskel describes, and part of this is also quoted in the Haggadah, actually. He says, "And as for your birth, on the day you were born, your navel was not cut. Neither were you washed with water for cleansing, nor were you salted, nor swaddled at all. No eye pitied you enough to do for you any of those, to have mercy on you. And you were cast on the open field in the loathsomeness of your body on the day you were born. And I passed by you and saw you downtrodden with your blood. And I said to you, with your blood live. And I said to you, with your blood live. Myriads, like the plants of the field, I have made you. And you have increased and grown, and you have come with perfect beauty, breasts fashioned, and your hair grown. But you were naked and bare. And I passed by you and saw you, and behold, your time was the time of love. And I spread my skirt over you, and I covered your nakedness, and I swore to you and came into a covenant with you, says Hashem, and you were mine. I washed you with water, and I rinsed your blood off of you. I anointed you with oil. I clothed you with embroidered garments, and I shod you with the skin of the badger. And I girded you with fine linen, and I covered you with silk. I adorned you with ornaments, and I put bracelets on your hands and a necklace on your neck. I put a nose ring on your nose, and earrings on your ears, and a crown of glory on your head. And you adorned yourself with gold and silver, and your clothing was fine linen and silk and embroidered cloth, fine flour, honey, and oil you ate, and you became exceedingly beautiful, and you became fit for the throne. So this is the description that Yechezkel gives for how Hashem took us out from the depths of, suffering and vulnerability as we were slaves in Mitzrayim, and raised us to become this glorious nation. And in Torah Or, the Alter Rebbe actually kind of makes this explicit, kind of develops this metaphor a little bit more, and talks about how in general we know that exile is always compared to labor, and the pain and the suffering of exile is the pangs of labor, and that comes before the birth. And Yetzias Mitzrayim being the first geula that we ever experienced as a people, that is the first birth. It's literally our birth story as a nation. And finally, putting all these pieces together, we can kind of understand how it is that matzah, which is the bread, right? The bread, just like that child who eats the bread, and that gives him the ability to acknowledge and have this awareness of their parents. Eating this matzah is literally like feeding us that faith that we were granted through the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim. In other words, when we came out of Mitzrayim, we were like this new, this infant who just was, through eating the matzah, is able to have this intuitive, natural, kind of inborn recognition and awareness of Hashem that transcends any type of logic and any type of explanation. And this experience of emunah, of this intuitive, innate security and sense of this is my God, this is my creator, and it's just this innate awareness that is what was implanted in us through the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And every single year when we eat matzah, we are, again, not just commemorating, or eating something that symbolizes what they did then, but we are once again ingesting that experience of innate awareness and recognition of our Father in heaven, of Hashem. And in Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe says how this bond that the child has with their parents, it's not weaker because it's not intellectual. It's actually stronger, right? You could imagine that such a powerful, attachment that the child has with their parents that's just from this very intuitive, natural place. And that is what we, as the Zohar says, receive from matzah. Matzah is called the bread of faith. The Zohar calls it the bread of faith, michla de mehemenusa. And the matzah is really, again, not giving us any philosophical proofs. It's not giving us an intellectual understanding. It's just feeding us this soul deep connection of a child who's calling out to their mother or to their father without even understanding what the word really means. So when you sit down at your seder to eat matzah, you're not just performing a historical reenactment. You're really accessing that same original moment, rediscovering your inner child, and calling out to your Father in heaven with this pure simplicity and unshakable certainty that none of us can really explain. And this is the emunah the matzah feeds us. This is the faith that all of us are born into. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope that this idea inspires you with a new appreciation for your experience of eating matzah and the seder, and just all year round, a new appreciation for what the experience of emunah can be. If you want to see the sources inside, please head over to our website to download your own booklet, or if you want to learn it with a friend or teach it to a class, you can order print booklets that will be delivered straight to your door so that you can hold it in your hand and learn it for yourself. Have a wonderful Yom Tov. We'll see you next time.